To the launch of the Stephen and Publishing the Sex and Matters report. Everything cancellation. Cue the rapture. I must say, it's been quite some time since I have covered a literary event where there is an audience viewing me at the exit. So this is very, very long for me. My name is Jenny Lindsay. I'm going to be sort of Compered. I'm going to say that before handing over to Helen Joyce for the panel discussion. As you can hear from my accent, I am from Scotland. As confirmed by the everyday cancellation report, I'm just going to say a few words at the start because I'm one of the case studies in the report. And I must say, although we are gathered here today to read about a really, really quite disgusting situation in publishing across the UK. When I think back to 6 years ago, which is when I started being hounded as a humble performance coach, for goodness sake, in the Scottish literary world. I'm glad that we are who we are now, compared to those lonely and isolating years, sitting on the floor, sobbing into a chicken bottle. So, yes, I'm very glad to be here, and thank you so much to all of the people in this room who supported me during and through my never-ending hounding. And also to everyone who's worked so hard to put together this report, more of which later. As one of the case studies of the report, what I really like about this report is that it covers not just, the cancellation stories that we're all quite familiar with now, but it shows how they're deeply embedded in every single part of the literary world. On top of that, the deep dive that has been done into the policies and the institutions that are scaffolding this sort of situation where writers really are being discriminated against. And I'm afraid some really bad books are being published. I will not say too much about the Edinburgh International Book Festival. It looks like you're right. Yes, and I think it was blatantly obvious last year that the problems in Scotland are just going to keep on going, unfortunately. But there are really talented activist writers in Scotland who do great street protests. So why don't you? If you know, you know, all right? And I'm not going to say too much more, but thank you so much to Matilda Gosling, who was such a good interviewer as well, I must say. Helen Joyce, who all of you know, who is going to interview for no more than about 25 minutes the panel behind me. Matilda, obviously, Matthew Hamilton, the literary agents, Gillian Philip, the author, and Helen.
Is there a hashtag to tweet? Are we allowed to tweet?
You can tweet.
Is there a hashtag?
No, make one and then tell us all.
Everyday cancellation.
Everyday cancellation. Everyday cancellation. Right, everybody. What we're going to do is start with a quickfire round, and I'm going to say 3 words to my panelists. And each has to answer for their own expertise. So Matilda, as the researcher, interviews people, Matthew, as an agent, and Gillian can speak both on children's publishing and on the shit show in Scotland. So, the first question is, what is it about publishing that has allowed gender identity ideology to take hold to such an extent? And I'll go on, I'll start with you, Matilda.
Okay, I'll go 3 points, and then I'll be quick. I just come from academia and the idea that all reality is socially constructed. Publishing is small and cozy, and it's very hard to divert from the new system. And there's a trade-off, women as a staff who sacrifice to wearing one pager of the one that enters their belief system. So,
that is the standard for quickfire.
Is this working?
No. There always has to be one.
I think one of the main problems is that grown-ups and adults in the industry have capitulated. They haven't resisted a lot of the the shift in powers was at the start. It was think that it's a very left liberal culture and that a lot of progressive ideology, the fact that infection within that world are not familiar or curious enough with other basic thinking, or indeed in the book, to escape.
You know, Gillian.
You don't have to be kind.
But you can, so thank you.
I'm pretty much saying almost exactly what Matilda said. Universities, the intake publishing is coming out of universities with no understanding or respect for the role that publishing plays in democracy. Anything to do with open debate, free expression is just, it's not something they understand or even want to understand. And again, as Matilda said, small world. Everybody's going to the festivals, everybody's going to the parties, everybody's going to lunches, very much central London, and it's hard to, and it's a self-reinforcing moral kind of imperative to agree with everything that is being said.
Yeah. So I'd add to that, from working at Cape Promise, I'd add what's called the principal agent problem, which is when you've got a principal who's the person whose money is at stake, and then you've got an agent who's the person who's making decisions. And so one of the things that was most striking in Matilda's report is the extraordinary difference between the advances that are given to people whose books were clearly going to be absolute hits, and then books come out to the absolute hits, and suddenly as copies, and then books that were obviously going to be very popular. And that's because the people who were making those decisions, it's not their money on the line. I mean, after Ray Slavery's book came out, I looked to see what people were paid six-figure sums on both sides of the Atlantic before that book. So they weren't still the same much amounts. So I would make a turnover.
Oh, very interesting, right?
All right, Matilda. Now, this is not a big fire around. I want Matilda to give us a considered answer to this. So you did the interviews for this research, and some of them are from named people, some are through, and some of them are anonymous. And the report talks throughout about a chilling effect. So tell us what that looks like in practice.
There are a number of different areas where people who are working in publishing end up feeling this chilling effect. So it comes through to commissioning, I think, first of all. So it seems to be that a lot of commissioning decisions are made on the basis of what it feels as though it would be useful to progress through the organisation. Sometimes editors can actually state decisions that they don't like the content when it comes to book proposals with which they disagree. There are a number of examples given in the report which can outline what editors have come back and said to individual authors, which shows this problem. And I think there's a kind of soft censorship that happens as well, where you have somebody bringing a proposal to the table and then it immediately gets shut down and people think, okay, I'm not going to do that idea again or anything of this nature again. So the ideas kind of get squeezed out from that starting point. And then you've got the very stark contrast with book sales. So anyone that's seen any of the coverage today, you'll see that the book analysis done for this report shows that books based on gender identity ideology only sell something like 14% of the proportion of books about women, and they sell even fewer, a third proportion of books about that are based on kind of books written by gender-critical authors. So there's a really stark difference between those two things. Then it feeds, the chilling effect feeds as well into book publicity and marketing. So Women's Hour, it has interviewed Helen, it's interviewed Kathleen Stock, but not about their books, even though they went on to sell tens of thousands of copies in the UK. They have, however, platformed Ray Savory, who wrote Penis, heartbreaking work of staggering penis, because about his belief that he was transitioning into a woman. There's platformed Dawson, who has presented womanhood as being a submissive sexual identity. So the gender-critical books written by Kathleen and Helen seem to be much more relevant to Women's Hour audience than most books. And you can see it as well in books that get stocked. Lots of people talking about books being hidden and kept in the back of rooms rather than actually being put out on bookshelves as well. If it was areas for which booksellers would disagree. Then there's deplatforming, so a lot of people experienced being moved from platforms. They were invited to go and speak, and then suddenly the invitation got rescinded. You had events where people haven't been able to get into the room because they had protesters at the door. You had people that have been kind of not being able to be interviewed in detail at the end of the talk because the talk just had to finish and we wanted to get out of the room because it's such a hostile environment. And then I think very importantly there's been calls very often on social media not to employ people on reasonable contracts based even on who they follow on social media. So some people have been told if they follow Jenny Lindsay, for example, that they are not going to give them work. Abuse and harassment is probably the most striking and extraordinary part of this. And it comes from within publishing as well as from outside it. There's been numerous examples of targeted harassment of people with mental disabilities within the industry. There have been rape threats, there have been death threats based on people's belief that sex is binary and immutable, which seems not to warrant the experience of being called bigots, being accused of cult-like hatred, having their views equated with transphobia, with racism, with all sorts of things, having their professions targeted, their reputations targeted. So all of this has kind of contributed to this incredibly hostile environment. And then the final element is this kind of silence that ensues from the Gillian effect, because people don't feel able to speak out. There's a perception among employers that everyone has the same perspective on these issues because people feel unable to speak because they see what happens to other people who do speak out about it. So it creates this incredibly difficult space for anybody to raise concerns, raise issues, to talk about internal policies within their organisation that may be unlawful. And as you'll see in the report, there are a lot of examples of policies that probably are unlawful and people can't speak out of them with caption. So it's this kind of very widespread chilling effect that I think affects all levels of the publishing industry.
So I read Matilda's, I think, first draft, and I must say I found it chilling to read it all in one go. And today, as people in the groups that I'm in doing exactly the same since it was published, again, people are saying, my gosh, seeing it all in one place, I'm getting the chills. Okay, Matthew, so as an agent or a good person to answer this, so it's clear in the report that a lot of publishers put in place policies and processes that are probably unlawful. And what's your insight on how that has happened and what risks are for the employers from that?
I think first of all, there is some rules. I don't think we know rules yet. There might have to be used for the last month. I don't feel that's what they're consulting with. They're looking for guidance and what they're consulting with the prime networks, Stonewall, through the staff. I spoke to a CEO of a big five, and none of them believe in personality lobbying. None of them. I don't think CEO one of them. He said, what are you going to do? I've got to think we'll follow evidence. And I think it's managing and keeping the peace. And I think that sort of managing and keeping the peace runs all the way through it. And I think it's very, very hard. Who is going to be the person within the company that's going to actually say, look, the Equality Act's wrong? Basically should say to everyone, you should balance in everyone's rights. And, there isn't a network. There isn't a women's network. And I think because there's a parallel model to this, which is basically any writer central author experiences everything that's put in this report as well. This is not just to do with the trans issue or gender equality, it's broadly about an applicant and logical diversity. And I think they found that very easy to put gender equality in the Nazi category. Just let's not deal with it. So I would say that there's a lack of curiosity to challenging ideas about what's currently fashionable, and I think that there's a lack of seriousness and a lack of spark. They really don't put it into this. And I think the guy who runs Charlie Redrick runs Marvel Collins did once during an agent's Zoom meeting say to a young question, what do you do with this? to make you feel safe. He did actually say, it's probably going to eat, but I think that, there has to be a change in, I think it's also a hiring practices, and they were really taking it seriously. You have to know, the type of person that you're hiring, and what will they believe in, and what policy stands for, and that the institutions need to become neutral. There's all kinds of ways in which these networks and alliances can work well together. For example, the trial network, the progressive networks, work very happy with the Muslim networks. So that the Muslim networks for all but these are radically different parts of the world. And they found a way to make it more functional and funded. So I think that's one of the things that say quite about this report, about seeing and about all the other issues, is that there has to be a sort of organised network, to represent you. This is just, it's time to see one person at the there's one person sort of question. It's your paper, so yeah.
Can I ask you a follow-up question, which is why is the market not sorted this out? I mean, we're meant to be in sort of capitalism ready for tooth and claw. This is an interesting question.
It can, sometimes the market can sort of change the right. So for example, say the Douglas Murray is considered almost satanic, like its first sellers for 17 weeks, it was greeted by the conquering hero. Even though that second book wasn't a takedown of progressive ideology, with every one of the British movies you would subscribe to. And it just shows you actually, even amongst the rank and file, how really basically no one really feels this very deeply. It's a few loud voices, and a lot of people trying to get on, not feeling very secure in business. And I just basically just think it's just everything persons in that.
So if you can sell enough to get bestseller list for 17 weeks of brand.
But so in terms of considering a new acquisition, even though you can show the stats on the Substack numbers, the Twitter numbers, no, it's another thing, the way in which ideology has overruled the profit drive. It's just not sustainable, but I think there is already a referendum happening now financially, with a lot of the industry went on in the summer of Floyd. I think the receipts are coming in for that now. And I think there are signs of it now in real ways on this.
And one of the ways the market corrects is there's new entrants come along like Swift Press. I mean, get yourself a more well-priced, not me. In these
Yeah.
so that was hard on.
Getting on so many times in December, it's going to be
Exactly. All right, my next question is to Gillian, and it's something seems to go on with children's publishing in particular. I'm going to ask, I'm going to ask her a supplementary, which is why it's got the shit show, and I'm going to get Jenny up to join her. So let's start with the children's publishing.
Oh God, let's start with the children's publishing. So Rachel is in the room as well.
Yes.
Rachel is up in the brown if she can.
Yeah, I have asked myself a lot, what the hell happened to children's publishing? I think there's an element of, so children's publishing and children's writing has always, to some extent, been viewed as the easy option. So if you are a celebrity, and you too see it with celebrities, you want to publish a book, you're not going to sit down and write a thriller or a literary thing, you'll get ghostwriting right for you. It's easier to just write a children's book. Because children will swallow anything, right? Well, no, they won't, and they didn't. And it didn't used to be like this. I mean, children's books could be children's books be some of the finest literature this country's produced. And children are not dumb, and they do know a good story when they see one. But publishers do, and children's publishing as well, they have fans. So, I was thinking of the vampire fad a day or two ago. It was long and I think, wasn't it? And some, great vampire exciting and well-written vampire stories were written, but publishers went on longer, because they would sort of keep on until, it died. So, by the end of that, they were getting really bad, bad, poor quality, not so well-written, and eventually the fan just dies away. I think this too, like the publication of all these I mean, gender ideology books aimed not just at teenagers, but at middle grade and at young readers, preschoolers, future books, from a young age. And it's because that too is a ballad, and they thought it was going to be really popular. I don't think it was, because the finances have shown that. But this one's a bit different in that you're publishing new bad vampire books. It's not actively dangerous to the people reading them. You know, it's just shit, stupid shit. You know, it's not going to put them in a mindset where they're not, oh God, I wasn't meant to be a girl, I was born in the wrong body. And have this set into their head in pre-lessons, and when the Tavistock was still running, possibly with one parents' blockers. I mean, these books are still actively dangerous, even though the Tavistock isn't operating anymore. So this fad was far more dangerous than your average kind of craze in publishing. And it's harder for them to put it as well because of the activism behind it. You know, as you're saying, that it's their younger staff. They don't want to lose this. This is they really believe it, or even if they don't believe it, they believe they should believe it. And we've got that small kind of echo chamber in publishing, small world thing again. And the other reason I think there's an element of probably children's publishing being a deliberate target, because the concept of the trans child simply wasn't a thing for until like 5 minutes ago. You know, transing was something that grown men did because, you know, they wanted to be transvestites, so fine. But the transgender thing came along. What trans children, which were actually, they're not a thing, but they say they're a thing. What trans children are validation for middle-aged men who want to be transvestites. Because I was always, even as a child, I was transgender. And they need that validation. So it's almost as if children's publishing was a target for it. And it's ironic when you think the main people who are influenced are simply young female minors, whereas the ones who need the validation are middle-aged men.
Yeah, and Jenny, in relation to that, is it partly because people who buy children's books are often not children? These grown-ups and librarians and teachers.
Librarians and teachers, they're very much part of the cult, basically. And they'll get early displays of the flags. The kids don't enjoy these books because the books are impoverished. I mean, I'm not looking at picking out for special attention, but most of them are just, they're diabolical, they're badly written, they're badly designed, they're terrible stories, some of them are extremely dodgy on the fetish front. And they're not good. Children don't like them. Children want a good story. Children want great writing and adventure, and they're not getting it with these books. So it's the adults who are buying it in quantity to put in libraries and schools. And then there's a self-image. The other thing about it is the self-image of children's writers, that they are good, kind, loving people, and they will go on believing that, wanting to believe that, however they behave in real life or online. And Rachel very interesting, she's here. Who persecuted Rachel? Actually, children's writers, and they still think they're good people.
So in the Scotland question, I'm going to have my mic Jenny, and I'm going to let Gillian and Jenny
Well, that'll be great because it's to do with size. Both about Scotland as a population is smaller than London, and that also because a lot of the literary institutions are based in Edinburgh. So everybody in Edinburgh works with these institutions, bumps into each other on the street, and that when things were going swimmingly for me, that was quite nice. When it started to be horrible and sad and depressing, it was horrendous. Like we walk around Edinburgh going, oh my God, like I'm going to bump into something. And related to that is the incestuousness between the Scottish cultural industries and Scottish Parliament and the lobby groups who Scottish governments paid to lobby them. It's a really interesting system. It's because we drink so much. Anyway, so everybody knows each other. Nicola Sturgeon went to Glasgow University to develop them, and Nicola Sturgeon was determined to be seen as progressive as well. And this ideology pitched to the post-independence referendum campaign, which continued even after the no votes. And this was a way for Nicola Sturgeon to kind of set her legacy as this progressive person, and she didn't listen to anyone, and also she really likes books. And she posts pictures of her to-read list, and I don't think she actually reads a lot of them, but a lot of the words are very trans and these sort of gender identity releases. And a lot of the artists and the writers in Scotland, and Mia Culpa was one of them, we voted for independence. It was very kind of, it was seen as the thing you did as an artist. So yay, let's imagine there in Scotland. Our imaginations ran away with us. So a lot of them will just not hear a word against Sturgeon. I have no gender critical feminists who continue to vote out for the SRP. Do you know what I mean? That's how strong that political cleavage is in Scotland. And this issue was Nicola Sturgeon's legacy. And that really messed things up. And another thing, I don't know if it's the weather or something got in the water, but Edinburgh, where I used to live and to love, just something got in. There's this bookshop, Lenny's Books, there's a really near Edinburgh University, and I just was so mad for it. No towers, no Tories. Actually, I'd be kind to everybody. So there's that kind of thing as well, and also, you know, with my own situation, the poetry, the Scottish literacy was small, the poetry is smaller still, and though some it might seem like I punch up in a phone box or whatever, what's easier to do? Kick out and ignore and ostracize the one who's like, why, no, I don't think we should be rushing each other in this phone box, or, you know, keep her in there. It's just easier to pretend that I get drowned. It's hilarious. Some of my actors don't even say anything bad about it. It works great. They do try to get my book taken off sale at Edinburgh bookshops, but they do it quietly. So anyway, that's Scotland for you, just as a break.
I think Jenny said, I'm very reluctant to talk after Jenny on this, because Jenny has totally been at the sharp end of the Scottish literature scene. I mean, they were absolute bastards to you. And you had such a traumatic experience, and I think everything you said was true. And that's all exactly right. The other, I would add, it's quite interesting that I think Nicola Sturgeon, actually, when she thought that the UK government might do the Section 35, is it, and I think she maybe thought that would fire up, you know, there's the UK telling us what to do again, there's the bad English telling us and trying to correct us. Instead of which, nobody, because I know a lot of nationalists now, which is a real change for during the referendums, because kind of I was on the other side. And so many of them are so disillusioned with her. And I think she expected this kind of rejection. Here's Alice for Jack, you know, being bad, tell Scotland can't do it with one. And that just didn't happen. And I think that was a much needed shock to that women's system.
Yeah, well, already. Okay, two last quick fire rounds. And my first question is, what has been the impact? And it's not to ask so much of you for staff and publishers, what's been the impact?
I think loneliness and isolation is probably the biggest one. Harassment by colleagues, that can be direct and personal, it can be on social media, it can be coded, like the interviewee who was told by a colleague that her organisation didn't publish hers. And then it can be an inability to push back on policies that don't work, on unlawful conduct, and on a lack of plurality and ability to have a diversity of ideas in the workplace.
And Matthew, what for agents?
It narrows our options so much. You can have fantastic writers, and basically for pockets of resistance you can target. There's Central Brown, there's Margaret Swift, policy is, the occasional where they have colleagues, but it's a very you're operating with incredibly tight parameters, and the particularly frustrating about it is that when a lot of the books you can get through with people resisting. We all know, as the report showed, time and time again, there is a huge audience out there, and it's actually what we think is actually what most people think, don't. So yeah, as mentioned, I mean, there's ways around it, and I think that there's, sort of like getting a lot, that it's still, I think a lot of books do still find that way, so it's not a big thing, but it's, we will be good in the next, the couple of years if the options start to increase.
And a shout out to my agent, who's
And what about the authors, what are the consequences for authors of this?
Well, the consequences for authors, if they are going to stand up against this, which, as the show report, it's pretty dangerous to stand against it, and you can lose your career. There's financial penalties, lose your career, personal consequences, you're going to lose friends, inevitably, health consequences, in your career.
you look amazing. Robbie's the jacket, Robbie's the
But I think worse than the personal impact was as terrible as that, and it's been absolutely diabolical, and Rachel and Jenny and many others have been telling you that. But I think what's really unforgivable is the destruction of children's literature, because the children's book world is just so much worse than the adult book world. And I think, and because it's so dangerous, I remember Helen doing this interview, I can't remember who it was with, but you said the last holdouts are going to be the parents, because the parents who trans their children damage their children, and there's no coming back from that. Now, I think publishers are going to end up, or many of them, and many people in publishing, are going to end up in the same redoubt as those parents, because they too, it might not have been their children, but they have damaged children. They cannot walk it back from that. They have really damaged children. The financial impact eventually hits, which it will, because they don't sell it. It will eventually hit. The grown-ups in the neighbourhood are going to, come back in and say, like, no more of that nonsense. And with any luck, a lot of people pushing this stuff are going to realise they are actually cut out for the world of publishing and writing, and they're not meant to be in.
Thank you. And I want to put my question and go on the route again, which is the consequences for our border culture. Matilda.
One of them is the distortion of meaning, the meaning of words and meaning of what we understand by common ideas. One of them is children who might start to understand temporary distress as being a marker that they should change something physically about their bodies. And then there's something about changes to scientific understanding and actually what we know about the world. There's something in the report that's worth having a look at, that some criteria about paying submissions that's in something like 700 journals, where in order to submit a paper as an author, you have to ascribe to an idea that sex is on a spectrum and some other ideas, and that actually changes fundamental parts of what we understand about the world, and that's got long-term consequences. Matthew?
In terms of broader culture, I guess the liberalism itself and how we run our society feeds very basic things that I think to be liberal now has become a very confused term, and actually a lot of it's very illiberal. I think there's also maybe a lesson in the way that we bring up our children, and our children are very different to how I was brought up, and that sort of slightly fussy, censure, boring, humouring, the way of just having to yourself a child. It's mirrored in the workplace now, so that's partly why, we have this option. And also just, so much of this, the ideology that people are trying to defending this is so dumb. And it's just, and I think that publishing should be, a sort of sanctuary or sort that has a responsibility to promote ideas and writing practice. And that should be the main thing. And I think that it's a very degrading the intellectual quality of life, as is in social media and lots of things. It's just a very Philistine movement. And
Yes.
I think we're quite ashamed because
Yes,
I say liberalism does not mean what it used to mean, and I think that is actually quite dangerous. And I think Western liberalism and Western civilization, Western society are actually at a hugely dangerous point. And I think, liberalism, how can liberalism mean a shutting down of voices because you don't like what they say? It's the antithesis of what being liberal should mean. And I do think that's dangerous, and I think we can come back full circle to what we were saying at the beginning about the universities. Children are being taught to think critically. The conversation that I read a certain dissertation and there were phrases in it, and she said to me, that's the phrases they want for you to pass. And it's like, that particular person can think critically. She did it because she had to.
Yeah.
But there's so many of these kids coming out and questioning this country, they haven't questioned this. And that's got nothing to do with liberalism.
Yeah.
And the left and right mean nothing anymore. And we have to find new kind of ways to describe these opposites because they ain't left wing to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, okay, so my last question before I hand back to Jenny for some sort of wrap up is to Matilda. And you give us some prescriptions in the report. Can you give us a few headlines from that?
Yeah, of course, and they are incredibly uncontroversial and they shouldn't be to be said most of them. So one of them is ensuring compliance with the Equality Act. And that's making sure that if you are a publisher or another organisation, I think a lot of funders and other organisations in the sector are also guilty of this, making sure you're balancing the needs and rights of different protected characteristics, not centering just one. Ensuring that people are protected from unlawful discrimination on the basis of belief, and putting in place equality law training by people who actually understand it. There's an example in the report where there's a specialist equality law trainer that refers to the Equalities Act plural. And you think if you get a trainer that gets the name of the act wrong, it's probably not training you want to be training the staff. A clear commitment to freedom of speech, and that's both internally and anti-commissioning. Institutional neutrality, and that means no campaigns that centre the needs of one group over the needs of another and protects the interests of all staff. Standing up to abuse and harassment perpetrated by some staff against others who are against them for behaviour externally, and then reviewing diversity policies to make sure the opportunities and careers appealing to underrepresented groups, including people from working class and other backgrounds that currently don't get as much funding.
Jenny.
All right, can you get a true friend of around by a few minutes, which is also when my poetry career. So excellent, great. So I'm just going to wrap up with a few thanks, and then I'm going to pass over to Helen for some more thanks. But first of all, I'd like to thank the venue and bar staff and for everyone helping out at the door. And I'd also like to thank, in her absence, the wonderful Joan Haley, who is up in Scotland and unfortunately couldn't be with us. She can't see me and just a huge round of applause for Susie Downs, who's in the room. And very nice for me, both for being part of helping get the report off the ground and for putting up with me when I stay at her house in London. Please put your hands together for Ursula. Finally, thank you to all of you for coming out and for being saying, oh my gosh, so nice, so nice. And thank you to your friends for filming and for the tech guys as well. Give them a huge round of applause for that.
You have to get yourselves up here. I asked for 80 flowers and I said, I think she might lose better. And then someone else got you flowers as well. Endless trees behind basically everything. And then the last person who gets blues and flowers, and which is of course Matilda. That you've done a really notable report that we commissioned that Sex Matters from Matilda. So Matilda did a report for us on the women's sector, and it was great. She was great, and we did a launch in Ireland. And then it was cited in the Supreme Court. Well, I don't think the husband, Peter Bailey, has managed to quite that yet. So, when your wife gets cited in the Supreme Court, you're going to go to live up to it, Peter. But I want to give the final thanks actually to a different group, and that is everyone who continues to report, whether that was with their name or anonymously. So when you do this work, as all my colleagues at Sex Matters here will get to tell you, some of them, Maya's in the room, Jenna, Beth, and Bryce is here from Sex Matters, quite a lot of us here. Fiona's here, I think Naomi might be here, she's in my ticket. And this year, arranging. They'll tell you that what happens is we get a lot of horrific stories, and those stories, they're like, by yesterday. Nobody ever shares them. We hear about people's livelihoods being destroyed, about losing friends, being publicly and privately insulted and find out. So the other day I was talking to someone with under the cases, not in publishing. A big court case, he hadn't won it, but he was illegal, and it's kicking off again. And he's in a group with me and various other victims, not the same person. And he messaged me one morning and said, I have to leave the group. I tried to hand my wife on me this morning, and my hands were shaking so badly I didn't do it. I can see this on my phone every day. The impact has been horrific. Any of us, even those of us who are in this, we know no more than a tiny fraction of the pain and the harm this thing caused. It really does take a lot of courage to withstand this and to talk about it even on the condition of anonymity. So the final thing I want to say tonight is thank you to everybody who talked to Matilda, to everybody who Stephen and Publisher, to Jane, to everybody who helped, to the people who helped to fund this, because you're all heroes. Thank you.